Welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Andrea Edney. I'm an editor at Bloomberg News, and I am the 111th president of the National Press Club. I'd like to take just a quick moment to ask you to please silence your cell phones if you haven't already done that. You don't want your cell phone going off in the middle of Governor Kasich's remarks and getting the stink eye from me. Also, if you are tweeting today, the hashtag is NPC Live. So we have with us today John Kasich, the current governor of Ohio, a former 2016 GOP presidential hopeful, and a possible primary challenger to President Donald Trump in 2020. Governor Kasich has had a very busy year. In addition to his day job, he's been making headlines by visiting New Hampshire, home of the nation's first primary, penning at least 5 columns over the past 6 weeks, criticizing the administration on policy issues ranging from trade to immigration, and for drawing as many contrasts as possible between himself and the current commander-in-chief. Today, he's here to discuss the impact of President Donald Trump's foreign trade policies and how the president's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin has affected America's relations with NATO allies. Please join me in welcoming Governor Kasich.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to make it clear that any of the views that I have, whether it involves trade, U.S. involvement around the world, whatever it is not, I don't express them for purposes of being in disagreement with the president or be interested in using those disagreements to further some political ambition. Because I have no clue what I'm going to do, and and I mean it sincerely. I came here today because I have become increasingly concerned about what I have observed in terms of America and our foreign policy. Just about a week ago, 10 days ago, I was talking to my Uncle George. Uncle George is 92 years old. Still walks a couple miles a day. He's a terrific guy. I was talking to Uncle George about a couple things, and we started to talk about his experience in World War II. Uncle George was in the infantry. He survived by having his unit not placed on a boat that was ultimately sunk, that was on its way to the Battle of the Bulge. But because they were crowded on that ship, he ended up, and his unit took a ship the next day and landed in northern France. My father, actually have a photograph of my father meeting with Uncle George in Europe during the war, both in their military uniforms. And my Uncle Steve fought on Iwo Jima. That's my family heritage. And when we think about our heroes, our military heroes, I always like to think back and to begin thinking back to the contributions that were made by our men in World War II. And I think about how amazing it must have been to be on those barges on D-Day, knowing that as part of the first wave, I may not survive, and I'm frankly likely not to survive. And when I think about that, I think about how amazing America is and how amazing our spirit is. And what is it all about? It's about preserving our values. It's about preserving the ability of every human being to be able to live to their God-given potential. It's about the ability of people to be free. Freedom of speech, freedom to practice religion. It's about the highest sense of what it means to be a human being. And America encapsulates that. Now, post-World War II, we helped rebuild the world. And many of us are familiar with the Marshall Plan. Many of our young people probably don't know much about it. But the Marshall Plan was incredible because not only did we rebuild parts of the nations who were our allies, but we also chose to help people who actually were our enemies. whether it was the reconstruction of Germany, the things that we did to help the Germans to get on their feet, whether it was the resources that we put into Japan to help Japan get on its feet. And as we look today, what was the payoff? Well, Japan is one of the strongest democracies in the world. And we know we all celebrated when it was all completed in Germany in 1989 when the wall came down. It was such a tremendous and a wonderful accomplishment to see people set free. And we spent a lot of money. Between 1946 and 1952, we invested $2.2 billion, or $18 billion in 21st century dollars, because we thought that it made sense for us and the world, for those that shared our values, because nobody functions very well alone. We do well when we work in teams. We do well when the strong support the weaker, when the weaker step up at times to give greater strength to those that are strong. And so we decided that it was important, post-World War II, to cement these alliances and friendships that we had with our friends and our enemies who ultimately shared our great and strong values. Let me tell you what I'm very concerned about. I think that we have been pursuing an America alone policy, not America first. We have been bullying countries all over the world. And to me, it never makes sense for America to adopt a wrecking ball strategy. Take the wrecking ball, break things up, and at the end try to declare that we had some sort of a victory. These relations are fraying. And I've been consistent in terms of talking about this for a significant period of time. I was in the Oval Office with Barack Obama talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Now, that is something that Republicans had as a fulcrum of their philosophy, and conservatives had as a fulcrum of their philosophy. Free trade, open trade, which connects the world, which allows people who are in poverty to rise out of poverty. And our free trade programs have allowed more people to escape poverty than any other program we've ever put in place. So I remember when my staff got a call from the Obama administration saying, would it be okay if the governor sat next to the president? And my people didn't understand the question. And the answer was, they said, why is that? Well, because there are Republicans who don't want to sit next to a Democrat president. Now, I served in Congress for 18 years. And whenever I had a phone call to be with the president, I always considered it to be a great honor because of the strength of the institution of the presidency. We withdrew from the TPP. We created a vacuum in Asia with a lot of small countries that kind of felt that they needed the strength of America to bolster them because they fall in the shadow of China, which has a value system that is so completely different than ours. I saw just yesterday that the wife of one of the Nobel Prize winners was able to leave China to go to Germany. He died in China in severe conditions because he had the gall to speak out and talk about freedom, something that doesn't look, where the government in China doesn't look kindly upon those concepts. So we withdrew from the TPP, and the world watched and was surprised. Then we turned around and we withdrew from the Paris Accord, unilateral withdrawal from the Paris Accord. Now, this whole argument about science, well, there's one thing that's pretty darn clear, that we are seeing significant environmental degradation. Just look at the Great Barrier Reef, some of which will never be restored to its beauty and its glory, created by the good Lord, that's shown the beauty of nature and the glory of God. We withdrew from the Paris Accord. It created a problem. Then we decided that after having made an agreement to stop the enrichment of uranium, that we would withdraw from the Iranian Accord. Our allies visited with the president and argued that it didn't make much sense, that it was an agreement that was being adhered to, and that it made sense to stay in there to monitor, we decided we'd go our own way. America alone again. And then I watched with trepidation at the G7 summit. I was not here, I was on a vacation with my family. And I was shocked to see the kind of disruption that was occurring at the G7 summit. Insults, unacceptable behavior, in my opinion, and at the end, not even an agreement on a communique. And then I watched the imposition of tariffs on our friends, our allies in Europe, the Canadians, the Mexicans, under the guise of national security. Now, a number of these countries that we have been picking on, we find their troops stationed with us in Afghanistan, contributions to the efforts in Iraq, and then under a national security guise, we say we're going to impose tariffs. This, without any question, has sent shockwaves through the EU, NATO, the Western world. And then I saw the opening of this NATO Summit. Now, one of the things that I was surprised about was the claim that of Germany's dependence on the Russian pipeline. Everybody would say that that's problematic. But if there's anybody that understands the rule of communism in a leader in the world, it would be Angela Merkel, who grew up in East Germany and understood exactly what it was like to be a victim of communist rule. She doesn't really need a lecture. So I looked at all of this, and I thought to myself, the alliance that has kept the peace for 70 years is being frayed. There is growing disunity, growing sense of a lack of trust, a growing sense of can we depend on the United States at particular moments in time. And declarations of victory are not, just don't tell the whole story. The fraying of relationships has consequences. Now, we all know, and I give the president credit for being willing to stand up to the Chinese who have violated our international property rules. Are tariffs the right way to go? Probably not. There are probably other approaches that can be taken that can bring a clear message to the Chinese about the fact that they need to stop doing this. But we need our allies to be willing to stand up with us to hold the Chinese accountable. Now, when you spend your time running around and getting into these disagreements in a disagreeable way, it's pretty hard to come back and ask your allies to support you when the going gets tough. You see, that's the problem. I read the other day that Hungary had been working aggressively to keep Ukraine from participating in the activities of the NATO Summit. Hungary, Poland, really that's shocking to me. Nations that lived under communism, that they are turning increasingly autocratic, and even in Poland, where Lech Walesa had to come back out of the shipyard to talk about the fact that the court was being damaged. And we know about the autocrat Hungary. And then when we look at the rest of the EU, we see a fraying. What I worry about is not some of the aims or the goals of the president. Every president has decided and made the case, as I said in the Congress, that NATO needs to do more to support themselves. What was achieved at this summit, from what I can tell, is that they agreed to what they had agreed to before. And they had agreed that they were going to live up to the bargain. Now, maybe it's been accelerated. I'm all for that. And there's everything right with some straight talk, but it has to be done, in my opinion, in an appropriate way. wrecking ball strategies rarely end up being successful over the long term. In addition, I commend the President for his efforts to try to step up and do something about the IP robbery that China commits on a regular basis, and I support that. But I think there are better ways to accomplish our goals. What's the bottom line on all this, and why am I here today? Because I am increasingly concerned that with the fraying of the relationship with our friends, with people who support our values, who love freedom, who are willing to invest human lives on the battlefield to preserve this, that as this alliance can potentially wither, what takes its place? What keeps the peace? Are there areas here that can be significantly improved between us vis-a-vis trade or commitments to defense or disagreements? Yeah, it can happen, and we need to pay attention to it. But by and large, this relationship, these friendships, have contributed to peace for 70 years. And if this alliance begins to fray in a more serious way, what takes its place? What are we searching for? What do we think will work better? The President now is getting ready to head to a summit that he said will be a loose meeting. And I saw there was a comment that perhaps the troop rotation in the Baltics could be called off if Putin asks. Hopefully the President will say no. Is it important that we have discussions with Russia? Of course, because we have mutual interests all over the world, in the Middle East, particularly with Syria. We have concerns about cybersecurity, election interference. All these things matter, but most important, the issue of arms control. We need to get back to the table to deal with the problem that is of arms control so that the world can be made safer. So I hope that this summit will be successful, but that the President will realize, and I'm sure he does, the significant difference between their approach to the world, our approach to the world, and that of our allies. This is not a happy day for me. I wish I wasn't here, to tell you the truth. And this is not any sort of a personal attack on the President. I don't believe in that. This is nothing more than a policy disagreement, but something with which I just have deep concern. I have 2 young daughters getting ready to go to college. Someday, God willing, they'll marry and they'll have children. They'll have a spouse. I don't want to see any cataclysmic wars on this globe. And until I hear something that is a better way to manage conflict in the world, until I hear a better way, I'm willing to improve what we have and work to improve what we have in a diplomatic way and to strengthen that alliance to keep the peace. This little chart that we see in front of us, let me just tell you a little bit about it. This was the European Recovery Plan, Marshall Plan poster. Whatever the weather, we move together. It was created by Isidor Speakmeester in 1947 as part of a poster design competition to sell the Marshall Plan. The poster depicts a windmill with the flags of all the nations who stood as recipients of the Marshall Plan spinning as blades, with the American flag shown at the windmill's helm. This is old, but you know, sometimes things that are old can still have great relevance today. And you can see all these nations who hold dear many of the values, although as we begin to see Turkey begin to slip under autocratic rule, we have a concern. But here at the fulcrum is the United States of America. One last point I'd make. I went to the security conference in Munich at the invitation of my dear friend John McCain, one of our great heroes. America will experience a vacuum of leadership as John McCain fights for his life. I do want to commend the United States Senate for two actions that they've taken this week. One, to express their concern about tariffs, and two, to express their support for NATO. Non-binding, but it's about the first time I've heard a peep out of them in regard to the kind of policies that we see conducted in the United States. Again, I want to make it clear, it's not a great day, not a day I relish, not designed to have any political implications, just to let people here in the United States and around the world know that there are other American politicians who are legitimate leaders in our nation who have a different view of the way in which we should conduct our foreign policy. Finally, all is not lost yet. Fraying, you know, when you have your clothes fray, you can repair them. We just don't want to get to the point where we do any more what I consider to be damage to the relationships that we have that have served us very well. Thank you. Questions? Yes, sir.
Governor Kasich, why is the prime? Oh, is there a mic?
There is a
We're
mic.
Andrea's gonna start.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, well, go ahead. If you want to go ahead and
Here,
ask
let me
a
have that.
question
I can help.
real quick. So the format, I'll have a few questions that I'm going to ask. Bob can start.
Oh, okay,
First,
thanks, Andrea.
if you'd like.
So is a
But-
primary challenge realistic, given that the Republican Party has dropped from 32 to 28%, and it's that base, that narrow base, that supports Trump by 90%? And is that why Congress is actually so chicken, except for the retirees, that they're totally afraid, and what can be done about that?
Well, you know, I think that I just commended the United States Senate for their action. Today's not a good day to talk about politics for me, because I'm not here for political reasons. I'm here because of my concern, and I have as people smile and roll their eyes, but you know, it's what's so interesting in this town is when somebody says something, it's never believed, and I got that. Why would you believe when? Seems like in this town, when anybody opens their mouth, we know they're not somehow telling the truth. I really don't know what I'm going to do. You know, my options are on the table, but I'm not here today to try to draw some distinction because, frankly, most people won't care. They're going to go about their daily lives and say, well, the Europeans are going to do more and all that, and I don't think they really understand the implications, because they're not there. They can understand it. It's just they have other things they have to do in their lives. I think from time to time it's important for voices to be heard. I can't tell you about other people, but I received a lot of criticism and still do because of my unwillingness to attend a convention in my own home state or to endorse our candidate. And I make it clear to Republicans today, before I get around to endorsing you or working with you, it's not about party. It's about who you are and what you are. So I'm glad the United States Senate passed these non-binding resolutions, and that's good, but that maybe it's a step in the right direction.
Thank
Yes.
you. So the format of this news conference, I'm going to have a few questions to ask, and then I'm going to open it up to the room. And thank you, Bob, for your question. And we have a mic that we're going to be passing around. So when we do open it up, I would ask that you introduce yourself when you get the mic and ask your question, and then pass the mic back to Lindsay Underwood, who will be passing it around. So you talked about our relationships with other countries fraying, and you say that they can be repaired. In your opinion, what should this country be doing to repair its fraying relationships?
Well, I don't think this trade activity makes much sense. If the trade relationship between us and the Europeans need to be reviewed, then there are channels in which you would negotiate. I don't disagree with the fact that the President says, I don't think this is fair, but you've got to remember the agreements that are in place today were negotiated by his predecessors. And if you want to change those agreements, then do it in a systematic way and use the vehicles that are there to do that. Nothing wrong with that. But you better have the grounds on which you want to trade, in which you want to negotiate. And I'm all for that, but do it in an appropriate way. I think that we should be careful that unilateral actions, we should be careful about continuing to take just unilateral actions. I mean, there are times where if I were president, I might want to do it, but I wouldn't want to do it consistently. I think it also has to do with disagreements being lodged a lot more in private than in public. And I think, we have to respect other people, other countries. And if we are engaging in a wrecking ball philosophy, I don't think it serves us well over the long term. Now, the president was elected to do things differently, okay? I respect that. The people made him president, and they said, we want something different. Well, I guess we'll find out how well this works. And are we in a position, you have to ask yourself, if you have a neighbor or a group of neighbors and you expect certain things out of them, how do you deal with them? Do you air what you think on Facebook or whatever, or do you try to work quietly to resolve things so that at the end you can strengthen your relationships? I mean, actually, when you have disputes, you have a great opportunity to cement your relations even firmer. That's what I hope will happen. I don't think all is lost now, but I think there's great concern around the world as to the reliability of America as an ally, regardless of what some of the public statements are by the head of NATO, who, by the way, had a big dust-up with the president to initial, and then I saw him, doing his great diplomacy now. And I understand that. He has to do that. We don't want NATO to fall apart, neither does he. But you just go. I was at that Munich summit, and I heard a lot of things I didn't like. Didn't go this year. Wish I had, but hopefully next year.
About the NATO summit, one of the things that the president is seeking is for NATO members to increase their military spending pretty much across the board. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the 2% is right, and we've been involved in burden sharing since, I served, why would I come here and talk about all this? I served on the Defense Committee for 18 years. I understand these issues. And there is a need for the Europeans to do more, and they've admitted that they need to do more. It was 2%. Now I guess it's 4%. But it's not just about numbers here. It's about the ability to get them to do more while keeping us together in a significant way. And the 4%, I guess, came out yesterday. I heard this, but I saw that Trudeau said, well, we're not going to 4%. We're going to live up to the 2%. So, and the 2% had been agreed to years ago. Now, the president putting pressure on them, which I think probably could have been done mostly in private, and that doesn't mean that there's not a reason to have a shot across the bow publicly from time to time, but that shouldn't be the modus operandi. Even yesterday, I have a legislature that refuses to consider common sense gun bills. So I had something to say about it. But I don't spend all of my time just going and bashing because I'm not going to get very far. Even when it is frustrating, sometimes you need to learn how to restrain yourself.
So about tariffs, you just said that tariffs may not be the right way to go, for example, with China.
Yes.
So what do you think the right approach there would be?
It's really interesting because when you take a look at what the approaches have been on IP, they've fallen way short of being effective. I had a call the other day, long call, extensive call. In fact, I'll be in about a 5-hour meeting tomorrow just talking about trade. People believe that the tariff is not the right response to IP. I said, well, I'm going to give some credit to the president because he's just not looking the other way on this. However, the better way to be able to pressure the Chinese, because some wonder whether these tariffs are really disrupting them as much as we would like. There are other ways in which we can affect change. It might involve the number of students that come to our university. It might involve the kind of the investments that the Chinese want to make in this country. It may involve the things that we can do against the Chinese financial system if they are going to continue to steal not only our technology, but the technology of our allies. It's just very difficult when you spend your time working people over to then come back and say, hey, we got to just work together on this other issue because I really care about it. But that is probably the better approach than the tariffs. But the president is right that the Chinese, it has to be stopped. You know, and another issue here that we have to think about. So I take my technology company to China, and all of a sudden they're stealing my things. I mean, that's like going to a park somewhere in this country and letting your iPad and cell phone sit on a bench. Somebody's going to steal it. So there isn't any surprise that some of our companies have gone over there. And now that they've been damaged, they're like, oh, well, come and help me. And I'm all for helping them. But, you know, think twice before you put yourself in an environment where you're going to be pressured. And in some cases where you're going to be pressured to be careful about what you say. That profit is not that important when it comes to undercutting your values.
Do you think Congress should limit the president's authority to impose tariffs based on national security?
Well, being an executive, of course, I don't like giving power away, but in the sense is that the Congress can take some actions if they were willing to put some limits on this. I think presidents should have the ability to act unilaterally when it comes to trade, but there ought to be in close consultation with the Congress. And in terms of whether that they should get congressional approval, I mean, I don't probably not, but Congress can do some things now, I believe. And, you know, Bob Corker has expressed himself, pretty colorfully. I forget exactly what he said. They were all part of a cult or something, you know. I wouldn't go that far. I'm more restrained than that. But the message is that why aren't we doing more to say that this tariff policy is wrong? And frankly, my understanding is both the House and the Senate is beginning to say that this policy is wrong. Now, maybe some of them do it because of the interest that they have in their state. And everybody wants to say, well, what about Ohio? Okay, well, Canada accounts for 38% of our exports, and they're the #1 trading partner along with Mexico. But it's broader. When I was a congressman in the 12th District in Ohio, I didn't think of myself as a 12th District congressman. I thought of myself as a member of the United States Congress. And as the governor of Ohio, my primary responsibility is Ohio, but I'm also aware of how this affects the rest of the world. What's wrong with tariffs? Well, tariffs raise the price for consumers, particularly for those people who find it the hardest to have money to spend. It gets into a position of where competition is limited, which means your products are not as good because of blunting innovation. And finally, it creates angst between you and your trading partner. Now, if there is a problem, and this is where I believe the Congress should be working, is to create an expedited process that when trade violations occur, that there can be remedies that can be called for almost immediately. Right now, the bureaucracy, and this is where we have a problem and where things should be upgraded. What we need to have is an expedited process, because what good is it? You win the case and you already lost your job. So we need to be expedited. One other thing in dealing with China, we need an updating of the WTO. So, for example, in China, it's state-sponsored issues here that we can call them on, but these are sort of state-sponsored industries. This is not the government itself, and we don't have an effective way to redress this. We need to have our allies update the WTO so we can have more effective action.
What sort of effective action would you like to see?
There's a whole range of things that can be done. You know, it's like with North Korea. One of the things that I always thought, and I've always believed, that the Chinese control the actions of North Korea. I'd said a couple months ago that I thought we should have been targeting some Chinese banks. We didn't do that. Now, North Korea is a whole other issue. But the bottom line is that there are ways in which our smart people can figure out, if they don't consider all the political implications, of which we can get China's attention and begin to stop the theft of IP.
So sanctions is one idea.
Well,
right.
there would be a range.
Beyond sanctions? Can you comment on
No,
anything specific? All right.
Enough. for this.
Now, okay. So I know you've said that you're not here to speak about your own political goals, but I do know that everybody here is really curious to hear just a little bit. So if you haven't yet decided whether you're going to, I know, if you haven't yet decided, what might you be waiting for? What could be the impetus?
I'm waiting
at
for
what point
Godot.
You're you might be waiting for a while.
No, look, the deal is I used to do taped interviews with the national media. Now you can't do a taped interview because 5 minutes from now, there's new breaking news. So I don't know. And, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know exactly what my future is. What I'm most concerned about now is what's happening in my state. Yesterday, I announced that we went from, listen to this one, 89 cents in our surplus funds to 2.7 billion in 7 years. From 89 cents in the piggy bank to 2.7 billion. We're up over 500,000 jobs, 520,000 jobs. And there's a lot of issues that I have to work on. And as I said yesterday in a conversation with Bret Stephens in Columbus yesterday, people wonder, well, why does he appear on national television? Because I have some things that I think need to be said that I think can contribute to the national good. But I don't know what I'm going to do. I know this, I'm trying to keep a voice, I'm trying to keep a team together so I can continue to talk about these things. The conversation I have today didn't come out of the blue or on the back of some napkin in some kind of a loose meeting here. I spend a lot of time trying to learn and to be in a position where I can communicate as effectively as I can what I think is constructive for our country. I hate to just say this to you, but the Lord is largely going to determine my future, and I don't know what it is. Is it okay? I know I'm going to be okay, that I know, but what that's going to translate to, I just don't know.
Okay.
And I'm not running around the country telling people I'm running for president. I'm not having that. I tell people I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. They don't like that because they would rather me tell them definitively. I can't tell anybody definitively. And my wife is the one who's most concerned about my definitive answer. Okay? She'd be thrilled if I did this again.
So if not, let me ask in just one more way. If not president, what are some of the other things that might be on the table for you? Perhaps.
Maybe something involved with the media, maybe something involved with business. I don't know. When I left Congress, I did a number of things, finances and television and speeches and books. I've written 4 bestsellers, which is really remarkable for me. That may be my best accomplishment of my life. I really don't know. We see what comes. But I want to just get through the tape. And if you don't get through the tape, we remember people how they start, not how they finish. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. We remember how people finish, not how they start. And I just want to finish strong. And I intend to do that, and so does my team.
Well, I think everybody would agree that you've had a very strong run so far. I'd like to open up for questions. Yes, Wes, go ahead.
Wes Pippert, I know you don't want to talk about Trump, but looking ahead politically to 2020, do you think he will be judged more on his policies or on his character and style?
Well, look, I think the real question for 2020 starts with who are the Democrats? I mean, as I look at the Republicans in disarray and abandoning, as Bret Stephens said yesterday, we used to be pro-trade, now we're anti-trade. We used to be pro-immigrant, now we're anti-immigrant. We used to be for these international organizations, now we seem to totter as to whether we're really for them or not. And that's really concerning. But I don't know who the Democrats are. And with the Republicans, they're worried about offending the, quote, the base. I am so tired of hearing about the base, okay? Lead. Stop worrying about a base. If you lose, you lose, okay? And if you win doing your own thing, you know what's so great about that? Then you have a badge of honor. The Democrats, they have to figure out how to go along and be approved by Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie at one point, I think, wasn't he a socialist or something? And so he still is. So, if you don't get approved by Bernie, so what's happening is the Democrats are moving farther and farther to the left. Now, the question is, well, I think anytime you have an election, one person is measured against another, and everything will be taken into account. Style, policies, success, results. I mean, that's really how it works. And so I don't know. We're going to have midterms coming. We'll see what happens in the midterms. That'll say something. I'm sorry. I can't tell you what's going to happen in 2020, because when I walk out of this room, 5 minutes from now, there could be something else that has to be taken into consideration.
Governor, I'm Sabrina Eaton from Cleveland.com and the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I was wondering what else you're doing here in Washington while you're here, and how
doing
long
more
you'll be
media.
here.
Going to have a meeting with a friend, and that's about it. The whole purpose of this trip was to come in and talk about this. This was the purpose of the trip, and we'll be going back tonight, not as early as I would like.
Thank you. Simon Ateba from Today News Africa. We see dictators around the world beginning to demonize the media and call them fake. What do you think President Trump's constant attack on the media is having around the world? Thank you.
I think that the free media is critical to freedom. I mentioned all these other things that represent freedom, which is freedom of speech, freedom to practice religion, freedom to rise, but also a critical ingredient is freedom of the press. And if you look around the world, there are autocrats who want to obviously limit. I mean, in China, we think you don't have any free press. In Russia, you have no free press, limits to it, and you get out of control and they shut you down. It's not helpful to be calling names to the press, but I think the press also has a responsibility to how to manage their own behavior. That I think it's important that the press not go for hits and clicks, not sensationalize everything, and not be on a rampage to tear, against a particular political philosophy. Just do your job, report the news, be as objective as you possibly can, and so I think that's what we'd like the press to do, and I think the badgering of it is not constructive, other than maybe to get the press to think about a little bit more about their responsibility.
I think there are a lot of hardworking reporters and editors in this room who do strive to be objective and working real hard to do their jobs well.
Okay, I was the press, so and not to the degree that many of you are. I have great respect for. Look, I think the press is such an important part of America. But I am concerned, though, about the notion that we're going out of business. We got to generate more hyperbole. That's just not, that's like a politician that says, I have to vote a certain way so I can be reelected. I mean, the great thing about the press is when they can cover something and be as objective as they can and not hype things to a point where there's a distortion.
I think it's a very interesting comparison that you draw. We have a question right here.
Governor, my name is Amy Schenker. I wonder if I could ask you a question that's more related to economic security rather than foreign policy or national security. So I often write about labor issues, and I was struck by a recent Bloomberg Business Week cover story entitled, "Why Do Americans Stay When Their Town Has No Future?" It was about plant closings.
Yeah, I think I read that.
Okay. It was about plant closings.
I'm well read,
in Adams County.
Just kidding. Yeah, I saw that article.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So allow me to read a brief quote for anyone here who
Sure.
hasn't read the article. And it's, despite months of trying, neither the workers nor county officials could get a meeting with Governor John Kasich. Adams County, Ohio's poorest county, lost its major employer, 2 power plants. Why didn't you meet with workers in Adams County? What are you going to do to counter the negative impact of more than a dozen power plants, including a couple nuclear plants, now facing closure in Ohio?
Well, first of all, I don't think that report is accurate. I asked my people about it, and we'll always meet with people who find themselves in a tough situation. Now, what we're seeing in our state and in our country is the rise of the gas-fired plant. That is replacing a lot of the coal-fired plants, okay? But I have been engaged in really a comprehensive plan in Appalachia to help save the lives and guarantee, not guarantee, but provide a hopeful future to a number of young people whose mothers and fathers are drug addicts. I don't know if you're aware of this in Scioto County. We spent an enormous amount of time. Bobby Kennedy visited Appalachia and poverty-stricken areas 50 years ago in this country. We've made very little progress. Why? People like the values, they're comfortable in their home and all those kinds of things, and they don't leave, and it's really pretty interesting. What we're doing in Scioto County, which is to bring the entire county together, people who provide support for people in need, people who have drug problems, but we've also brought the business community, the faith community. They're all participating in Scioto County. I went back down there, and we're helping them. We're providing some funding, but I'm telling them, no, you have to also do your own thing. And what's happening in that county is a spark of hope that by getting communities to work together aggressively, and many of the people in those communities had never met each other before or never been in a room together or worked together. Now we're beginning to see really terrific cooperation among the entities in that county. We are in one school. We're now going to expand this to several other schools. And these are young girls that came to see me who said that their parents were drug addicts in and out of jail. I said, we'll put you in foster care. No, we can't because we're raising our brothers and sisters. We've devoted a significant amount of time, which the reporters from Ohio are aware of, to try to give them hope. Now, I went back down there to talk about where we stood. And there was a gathering of these young people. They couldn't believe that our government had responded the way we did. And I said to one young lady, what difference has this made to you? She said, well, I no longer think about suicide. You see, I've become convinced that the solutions in these poverty-stricken areas means that community together has to build itself from the bottom up, with help by people who may not live in that community. With the growth of technology, the ability of distance learning, with the ability of companies, call centers or whatever, if we can get high-speed internet in more and more of these places, it can change the economic calculation to give people a chance to be able to rise. I also created a program in our capital bill where I think we set aside, how much, Jim? Did he leave? It's only my press guy here today. Can you stay in the room? How much money did we put on our capital bill for communities? Okay, so I, for the first time, created a $20 million fund for communities to be able to invest in a center of a county or a town. For example, this is the YMCA. Now, I'm giving you a lot here, but this is really important to me. That YMCA is a fulcrum. There are many other places around Ohio where if they can get some money, some capital money to fix their roof and do things, they can begin to gather the community. We have spent so much time top down, and how's the poverty rate? No better. That doesn't mean that the top shouldn't help, but frankly, these solutions, by and large, have to start at the community level, with everybody thinking about creative ways in which to bring prosperity to them. So the bottom line on all this is that the problems of poverty in Appalachia are vexing. I believe that if we can be successful in Scioto County and begin to spread this, it's not only going to help young people, but it's going to unite communities, and I think it will solve some of these problems that we've not been able to solve for the last 50 years.
Hi, Roe Haydar, ABC News. You had mentioned, just going back to foreign policy for a sec, the Marshall Plan, and I think about, for the Marshall Plan, it was done in light of the Russian threat in the early Cold War years, and so your Republican colleague Mitt Romney had said several years back that Russia was the number one geopolitical foe for the United States. In light of Putin's actions since then, do you think that's still the case? And if not, what do you think is the greatest global threat to America's values right now?
Well, I do think that Putin is an incredible threat. He is well, we all know who he is, a former KGB agent. We had two people die, or we had the poisoning of the couple in England, and now we've seen the spinoff from that with the death of one person from that. We know that he's interfered in our elections. We know that they have used technology to interfere in elections and to spread propaganda around the world. We know that he has aggressively supported this butcher in Syria, Assad, and he is a menace. I mean, with the invasion of Crimea, and I heard somebody say the other day from the administration, well, some of them speak Russian, so maybe it's okay. It is not okay. Crimea is part of Ukraine. And I really think it'd be a huge mistake to be able to say that maybe we don't need to do troop rotations out of the Baltics if Putin asks for it. Of course we need to do that. The Baltics feel threatened. Go over there and visit them. Go over and see how they're on a razor's edge here. So I think Putin is a tremendous threat, but that does not mean, like I've heard some in the Democratic Party say, it does not mean that we don't talk to them. Of course we have to talk to them. Of course we have some common interests. Look, the nuclear arsenals of both countries need to be managed. We need to be involved in stopping proliferation. And there is a common interest in fighting extremism, terrorism around the world. They've experienced in their own country. We know what it's like. So the issue of arms control is critical. To me, that should be the focus of this summit, to figure out a way in which we can have negotiations, complete what we had started, but recognizing who we're dealing with. Recognizing that we have more not in common than in common, but let's find those areas where perhaps we can have a negotiation and some agreements, while at the same time making it clear that we reject your values. I think Ronald Reagan did it pretty well, followed on by George Bush. So, yeah, I think he's very, very dangerous. But I also have to say that we cannot take our eyes off of the issue of Islamic extremism. Even though we're beginning to see ISIS be wounded and eroded, as you study this issue, you begin to find that there are many, many, many independent actors who are extremists themselves who want to do us great harm. That requires worldwide cooperation. It requires the sharing of intelligence. It requires the sharing of expertise. That's another reason why it is so important that we are unified with our friends in Europe who've experienced some of the great tragedies in their cities. Not that we haven't. We had it with 9/11. I mean, we know what it's like. We need to be together. And we can argue about 2% or 3% or 4%. Let's not take our eye off the ball, the big picture of unity, working together, preserving the peace.
Governor,
Anything else?
my name is John Murray with the German press agency DPA. Two brief questions. I understand you defended Angela Merkel, but at the same time you're critical about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And the second one is, would you elaborate, why do you think that Germany suddenly got into the crosshairs of President Trump?
Well, look, I mean, what I think everybody realizes that it's not a situation that's ideal. I guess Schroeder, right, was the person that first started the work on this issue of the pipeline. It's an issue, but Germany's not going to kowtow to Russia. And let me also say, I think Merkel's an incredible leader. I used to say Margaret Thatcher was the last man standing in Europe. I think Angela Merkel's probably the last man standing in Europe. And I just hope the German politicians and the people realize that they have somebody that is a great leader, represents great strength, and I think that to not have her in place in a time that is so difficult, at a time where we are all on edge, would be a loss for leadership in Europe, for European leadership and harmony. I'm a great admirer of hers. I think she's, I have great respect for her. Let me also say that as I read articles about Bavaria and their willingness to figure out how to maintain their makeup of their population exactly how it's been, and that we don't have room for migrants, and some of these demagogues out there that talk about the loss of their culture and their values. To me, it's irresponsible. Look, it's really hard when you're in Europe, as you know. We look at the problem of immigration in our country. And by the way, the immigration in our country isn't going to be solved just at the border. Yes, we need to have strong borders. But the problems are coming from places like Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras, where we have drug cartels and gangs. We made some progress, although I'm going to check the kind of progress we made in Colombia with a strong leader and what we did to restore some stability. But the United States has to have a unique program, in my opinion, for our neighborhood to defeat the drug cartels, the criminals, working with government both on economic and security issues. So while the border is important, if I'm living in Guatemala and they're threatening to kill my son or my daughter or rape my daughter through a gang, where do you think I'm going to go? Stay in Guatemala? They're going to come here. So we have that problem. But think about the problem in Europe, which, by the way, has been mitigated. The flow of migrants has been reduced. But these are human beings. They're not to be treated as some sort of widgets, and it's a difficult situation. And I think what Europe has to learn is how to better integrate. America has been a melting pot and an ability for us to integrate people of all kinds of different makeups. I wouldn't be here today. I'm so excited because my fellow brethren, Croatians, are going to beat the French in the finals of the World Cup, okay? But I'm an immigrant. I mean, I'm not an immigrant. I'm the son, daughter of people from Czechoslovakia, or we don't even know quite where, in Croatia. We have been able to integrate in the United States. They seem to have great trouble figuring out integration in Europe. And with the migrant flow early on, it was probably overwhelming. But you can't have a world where you tell people you're in a war-torn country and you're not going to leave. It's not going to work. And every time we see a young boy drowning on a beach, coming off of a raft to escape some war-torn area in Syria, you know what they do in Syria with barrel bombs? Where do you think those people are going to go? You know, they have a right to live just like we do. Now, that doesn't mean that Europe doesn't have its problems in terms of the flow. But my goodness, this is about human beings. And the Lord is watching the way we treat others. And you know, part of the reason I'm so glad to be here today is because I'm an American. And I know what America has meant to the world. You can feel it, you can taste it, you can see it, you can smell it. America has been a hope for freedom and humanity throughout my lifetime. And I want us to stay exactly like that. One other issue that I think we need to think about, by the way, and that is living a life a little bigger than ourselves. John Kennedy said, it's not what my country can do for me, it's what I can do for my country. JFK's words ring as important today as they did the moment he spoke them. It is about what we do for our country, not all what our country does for us, and it's true in your nation as well. We have an obligation to be part of a world where we can integrate in an orderly way. I don't know where that came from, but I feel good saying it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I
Is
think
that it?
we'll take one more question, perhaps here in the back, if there
or
is
we
one.
can stop.
Yeah.
It's always the last
Yeah, good
one that
morning.
gets me in
I'm
trouble.
Jukka Niva from the Finnish Broadcasting Company. Thanks for the great speech. Looking at the next Monday.
What happened to you in World Cup? Go ahead. I should ask
We're not
him
there.
that. Yeah.
But ask about ice hockey.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
there.
I know about it, yes.
What do you think? What's going to be the outcome of the Trump-Putin summit next Monday?
Well, what I hope is going to happen is they're going to talk about arms control. They may reach some agreement in terms of long-term policy in Syria. I happen to agree with the president. I don't think that we should be in Syria for any extended period of time, but I also don't believe that we need to be in Afghanistan for an extended period of time. I believe we need to reach agreement with our allies there to be able to disrupt any of these gatherings of these radicals, but to keep all of our troops there, to me, doesn't make any sense. it needs to be a plan. We don't have to announce it to the world, but we need to have a plan to be able to leave there. We're starting to engage in serious nation building, which in Afghanistan, nation building is kind of an oxymoron. I hope that we can deal with these arms control issues, and I hope we can make it clear to Putin that you got to knock it off in terms of cyber attacks or the spreading of propaganda. But if I were to go there, I would be focusing on arms control. That would be, to me, the most important thing. Thank you all.
Thank you, thank you. Don't go anywhere.
Oh.
We have a tradition here at the Press Club, and before we do that, I'm just going to call everybody's attention to a couple of events that we have coming up. Today we have a luncheon with the CEO of Union Pacific Rail, Lance Fritz. Next week we have a luncheon with Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred, as well as a luncheon with Anthony Fauci, the director of the NIAID. And coming up in August, Sean Spicer is going to be talking about his new book, as well as Arnie Duncan. So I hope that you take a look at our Press Club website, come back for some of these great events and newsmakers. Now we have a mug here. This is the tradition.
Yeah.
We present all of our esteemed speakers with a mug.
Can I get one despite that? Okay, thank you.
We hope that you use it in good health. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you all for being here, your attention and your questions. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.